For as long as I can remember, I have loved going to the movies. There is something so captivating and transformative about film. How a gifted screenwriter can turn incredible ideas into powerful words, summoning drama, humor, and conflict from the page like casting a spell. How an actor who knows their part better than they know themselves can breathe life into those words, creating a character who until that moment only existed on paper, and a performance with the potential to be remembered for generations to come. And how a director with vision and imagination can bind those rare elemental creative forces, fashioning them into a gateway able to draw you into whole other worlds, holding fast to your senses until the closing credits roll, and sometimes, if the job is well done, for far longer. My name is M. Glenn Gore. I'll be your host each week as we explore in depth the newest releases both in the theater and at home. You're watching In Like Glenn, and today we're discussing Death Wish. The following video review contains spoilers for the film Death Wish. Proceed with caution. Something we try to do in these critiques is maintain a level of objectivity. At the end of the day, after everything is said and done, these are still just our opinions. Of course, we try to back up our assertions with evidence and examples, with comparisons and contrast, and regardless of what side of the rating scale we fall on, the intent is never to tell anyone what to or what not to watch. It's our hope you'll enjoy these reviews and determine for yourselves if you want to see the films we discuss. I'll never tell you not to watch something. In fact, don't ever let anyone do that.
And remember, no one has the right to touch you in your bathing suit area.
That said, we went to see this movie 4 days ago, and I have only just now accumulated the motivation and the wherewithal to actually sit down and write this. So if that gives you no indication about how this is going to go, all I can say is,
fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Death Wish is the story of Paul Kersey, a trauma surgeon working in a Chicago hospital who throws his Hippocratic oath to the wind by using a discarded handgun and his surgical know-how to become a vigilante, a grim reaper if you will, hell-bent on killing, maiming, and torturing the city's criminals after his home is broken into and his wife and daughter are murdered and put into a coma respectively. The first thing you'll no doubt notice is this film is a purveyor of a well-known trope known as fridging. Coined by Birds of Prey writer and all-around badass Gail Simone, the term finds its genesis in an issue of Green Lantern, wherein Kyle Rayner's then-girlfriend Alexandra DeWitt is murdered by third-rate villain Major Force before being stuffed into Rayner's refrigerator for him to later discover and then rage out over accordingly. And while that incident is certainly responsible for the name, it is by no means where the trope began. It has since come to signify any time a character, usually a woman, is injured, killed, abused, raped, or depowered for the sole purpose of motivating an almost always male character into taking action. Be that in the form of inadvertently walking into a trap set by the antagonist, as seen in 1995's Seven, putting him firmly on the path to his destiny, as seen in 2002's Attack of the Clones, attempting to prove something to the hero about himself, as seen in 2008's The Dark Knight, or in seeking some good old-fashioned manly revenge, as is the case here in Death Wish.
Afro. Yeah. I want revenge. Yeah.
This little slice of cinematic sunshine is brought to you by Eli Roth, who directed the 2006 gore fest Abroad Hostel, and the grotesque cottage in the middle of nowhere set flesh-eating virus yarn Cabin Fever. The 2002 one. Do not talk to me about that nonsense from 2016. He also played the Bear Jew in Quentin Tarantino's anachronistic 2009 masterpiece Inglourious Basterds, a film I expect I will be quoting for the rest of my life.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
If you got stoked at the mention of Eli Roth's name, I'm going to need you to go ahead and take a seat. Not because I dislike him, but because the Eli Roth you're almost certainly familiar with is surprisingly absent here. And while undeniably violent, Death Wish is abnormally light on viscera, which is something that has all but become Mr. Roth's rather blood-soaked calling card over the course of his career. Before I go much further, it should be noted that while the screenwriting credit for this film goes to Narc's Joe Carnahan, the finished product that appears on screen bears next to no resemblance to his script, so much that even he has shared his regrets over the film's moral and thematic deviations from both his draft and its source material. For the handful of you out there who may not know, this Death Wish is actually a remake of a 1974 Michael Winner movie of the same name. That version starred grizzled slab of leathery human Americana Charles Bronson, of all your dad's favorite movies. So I guess it's only fitting that Die Hard's own Bruce Willis should be the one to carry that crime-fighting, wife and daughter avenging torch. And while there are similarities and differences between the two versions to be certain, the most interesting item they share is their mutual indifference to the novel both are based on. That's right, for the even smaller handful of you out there who may not know, Death Wishes Then and Now are based on a 1972 novel, again of the same name, written by author Brian Garfield. The tale unfolds much the same as it does in its film adaptations, with only a few glaring changes, the greatest of which being that the Kersey of the novel was not a pro-gun, trigger-happy He-Man out to better the world by ridding it of the criminals who were seemingly dedicated to making the streets unsafe for decent law-abiding citizens with their every waking breath. Instead, the novel presented him as conflicted, tormented, and genuinely fearful of the path he found himself on, to the extent where he likened himself to a fascist, a Nazi, and as absent the traits and qualities of a hero as the criminals themselves.
We're the same, you and me. We're the same, don't you see?
Now, normally I don't address the books the movies happen to be based on in my reviews because I'm primarily only concerned with whether or not the film functions on its own. If I wasn't, this channel would already showcase a 2-hour video detailing the differences between the Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban novel and its movie adaptation, with a little never-ending story thrown in there just for good measure. But I digress. Garfield is infamous for his very vocal disapproval of the 1974 film, and I wager this newest version, for its glorification of vigilantism as a viable means to an end. At one point feeling so compelled to set the record straight that he penned the 1975 death sentence as a final nail in the thematic coffin the films had strayed so far from. In Bronson's Death Wish, Kersey doesn't even attempt to hunt down the criminals responsible for the murder and rape of his wife and daughter. He instead loses control and embarks on a vicious taxi driver-esque murder spree that finds him actively seeking out criminals, oftentimes before they've even done anything, willingly placing himself in positions where he is almost guaranteed to be mugged or assaulted, in effect giving himself permission to kill anyone he crossed. Roth's version abandons the only real thematic weight the original had going for it in favor of a rote and unimaginative revenge thriller wherein Willis's Kersey merely pursues the criminals responsible for the heinous acts against his family, slaying each in an ever-escalating series of more sensationalized fashions. This Death Wish is only too eager to depict Willis as a hero, and in a particularly distasteful example of white savior complex, as someone for minorities and the inner cities, both of which are held in shamefully low regard here, to look up to, be inspired, and, worst of all, rescued by. The only glimpse we receive that the road he's on has any psychological repercussions comes from a brief shot where we find the basement of his home in utter disarray, an unsubtle but welcome endeavor to illustrate his potentially deteriorating mental state, but it is swiftly swept aside, buried in favor of more scenes showcasing his celebrated brand of gung-ho, consequence-free, AC/DC-accompanied street-level justice. As with the original, any debate as to whether or not vigilantism is ever the answer in our society or in our criminal justice system is dashed by way of a montage wherein we are shown the city's citizens emboldened by and supportive of his actions. Here his approval comes in the form of mounting YouTube views and clicks and hits on social media, which serve as an unofficial affirmation of his crusade, a concept I wish the movie had taken an interest in exploring. The movie does at least attempt to mount a flimsy argument against Kersey's one-man war by using a number of story-adjacent radio show hosts as expositive mouthpieces for the film's alleged moral compass, but it reads merely as a glib and nauseating alternative to actually allowing the characters to have these discussions themselves, as well as an overt play for having its ethical cake and eating it too. As far as the performances are concerned, Willis is playing himself, which is to say he's playing varying degrees of John McClane, something that has become all too frequent in his work of late.
I'm Bruce Willis.
Truth be told, he looks bored through most of the outing. Breaking Bad's Dean Norris and Beloved's Kimberly Elise are also on deck as the barely effective Raines and Jackson, respectively, who are apparently the only detectives in Chicago, as they've been charged with both the investigation of the Kersey murder as well as the Grim Reaper vigilante case that has consumed the city and its media. Daredevil's Vincent D'Onofrio shows up as Frank Kersey, Paul's brother in Moral North, maybe, I guess, but that might be giving the screenplay too much credit. Elizabeth Shue of Leaving Las Vegas and Battle of the Sexes saddens you as Paul's wife and resident plot device Lucy, with a fleeting fistful of minutes she has on screen before she is brutally murdered, serving only as the impetus for Paul's non-existent character arc. She and Willis have fair chemistry during their few scenes together, but it's barely worth mentioning as the movie just comes off as so ready and willing to be rid of her.
Bye, Felicia.
Camilla Marone is given even less to do than her 1974 counterpart as daughter Jordan, who spends the majority of the film in a coma, denying her any degree of development. Between D'Onofrio's kind of aimless presence and a scene where we're shown Marone's Jordan knows Krav Maga, I'm forced to infer that this was initially a longer film, with many of its payoffs left on the cutting room floor, as nothing whatsoever comes of her knowing how to fight.
Does this come back?
Why? What are you talking about?
This storyline.
Nice twist.
So it never comes back.
The original at least cared enough to turn her character into a manic, hollow shell of herself to illustrate the aftermath of her attack. This version has no stomach for such things, though in its defense, the rape she suffers in the original has been thankfully excluded this time around, even if one of the three criminals responsible makes his intent to do so disgustingly clear regardless. As several other reviewers before me have already said of this film, Death Wish probably couldn't have come at a more poorly timed point in our country where the gun debate is concerned. As I speak, teacher and student walkouts and protests are happening in school districts nationwide. Campaigns aimed at exposing morally bankrupt politicians who've sold their souls to say nothing of the safety of their constituents to the NRA have become the norm, and there has been no end in sight to the breaking stories of police brutality. The timing is not the fault of the film, but I would be remiss if I wrote a review of this movie without calling attention to the astoundingly callous, tone-deaf, and careless manner in which the filmmakers churned this out. In fact, if the filmmakers were interested at all in bringing a more resonant, more evocative, more challenging story to the screen, they'd have taken a real risk and cast a black actor in the role of Kersey. In this version, as well as the original, the police are only too delighted to have someone out there executing the criminals they'd have to wade through due process to see convicted, going so far at the end as to let Kersey off scot-free, even allowing him to relocate to another city where his consequence-free rampage could begin anew. It would have been a far different story if the avenging vigilante roaming the streets, killing whomever he chose with a stolen, unlicensed gun had been a black male. There was an opportunity here to stay true to the spirit of the source material, to finally honor the novel by having a sincere dialogue about the dangers of vigilantism and the poisonous and ultimately self-destructive mentality that feeds it. Yet they've opted instead to glorify that extremism, willfully disregarding the author's cautionary message in favor of a soulless, reckless, ill-timed, brand recognition-dependent cash grab. And for that, I'm giving Death Wish 1.25 stars. That's it for today's episode. As always, thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter for more updates. Until next time, you were just in like Glenn.